This is the Nile Valley, and the time is long, long ago, more than 3,000 years before our own, during the age that scholars would one day call the New Kingdom of Egypt. It is a time of temples and reed boats, of mud brick houses painted white against the sun, of barley fields and date palms, and the soft drone of bees in the acacia groves. It is a time when the river is everything. The river is the road, the calendar, the provider. It is the thread that stitches together every village, every town, every life along its banks, from the cataracts of the far south to the wide, marshy delta where its waters finally meet the sea. And it is along this river, in a mid-sized town called Jaret, a modest place not far from the great temple complex at Abydos, that we will spend our time tonight. Jaret sits on the western bank, where the land rises gently from the river's edge through a patchwork of fields and irrigation channels before giving way to the pale, dry hills of the desert beyond. It is a town of perhaps a few hundred souls. There is a small temple here dedicated to Osiris, the god of the afterlife, whose great sanctuary at Abydos draws pilgrims from across the land. There is a modest marketplace, a cluster of workshops, a landing where boats tie up along the bank, and there are homes, mud brick homes with flat roofs and small courtyards, where families cook and sleep and argue and laugh, much as families have always done in every age. We arrive in the season of Shemu, the time of harvest and low water. It is late in this season now. The fields have already been cut, the grain stored, and the land has taken on a scorched, tawny look, as though the earth itself is holding its breath. The river is low and sluggish, its banks exposed cracked mud drying in wide plaits along the shore. The heat is immense. It presses down on everything like a warm hand. People rise before dawn and rest through the hottest hours of the afternoon, and the town has a languid, waiting quality, as if everyone and everything is anticipating something that has not yet arrived. And they are. They are waiting for the flood. But the flood is still weeks away, for now there is only the heat, the dust, and the steady rhythm of ordinary life, and it is in the quiet of an early morning, before the sun has fully cleared the eastern hills, that we first find Nefret. She is walking along a narrow path at the edge of town, where the last of the mud brick houses give way to a grove of acacia trees. She is a woman in her late 30s, neither tall nor short, with strong hands and sun-darkened skin, and the kind of face that settles easily into calm. Her hair is pulled back beneath a square of linen, and she carries 2 clay jars of water balanced against her hips, one on each side, with the practiced ease of someone who has made this walk 1,000 times. Nefret is a beekeeper. It is not the trade she was born to. Her father was a potter, and her husband, before he died of a fever 3 years ago, had been a leather worker who made sandals and belts for the local market. But the hives had come to her through her husband's mother, an old woman who had tended bees for decades, and who, in her final years, had taught Nefret everything she knew. And Nefret had discovered, to her own surprise, that she understood the bees. She understood their moods, their rhythms, the way they responded to weather and season. She could read a hive the way a scribe reads papyrus, not just the surface of it, but the meaning beneath. Her apiary sits beneath the acacia canopy. Several dozen cylindrical hives made of clay and dried mud, stacked in neat horizontal rows on low mud brick platforms, their open ends facing east to catch the morning light. The hives are warm to the touch even now, before dawn, and as Nefret approaches, she can already hear the low, steady hum of the colonies stirring inside. It is a sound she finds deeply comforting, a sound of purpose and order, of countless small lives working together toward something larger than any one of them. She sets down her water jars and pours a thin stream into the shallow clay dishes she has placed near the hive entrances. In this dry season, with the wildflowers gone and the river pulled back from the banks, the bees must fly farther to find both nectar and water. Nefret has been supplementing their water supply for weeks now, walking out here twice a day, once at dawn and once in the late afternoon to refill the dishes. It is a small, repetitive labor, and she performs it with quiet attention, the way one might tend a garden or comb a child's hair, not because it is exciting, but because it is necessary, and because there is a kind of peace in necessary things. As she works, the first edge of sunlight touches the tops of the acacia trees, turning them gold. A hoopoe bird calls from somewhere nearby, that distinctive, fluting cry that sounds almost like a question. Nefret pauses, straightens, and watches the light move down through the branches and across the hives. The bees begin to emerge, one by one, then in small clusters, hovering at the entrances before setting off into the warming air. She watches them go. She has always believed that the bees carry something sacred in their work. That honey, golden and sweet and incorruptible, is a small echo of the divine order that holds the world together. The old texts say that bees were born from the tears of Ra, the sun god, and that when those tears fell upon the earth, they became these small, tireless creatures. Nefret does not know if this is literally true, but she feels its truth in her body every morning when she stands here and listens to the hum of the hives and watches the bees rise into the light. It is enough. For now, in this dry and patient season, it is enough. Let us leave Nefret to her morning and drift now toward the river itself, where the water moves slowly between its shrunken banks, olive green and glassy in the early light. Sandbars have emerged in the shallows, pale ridges of sand and silt that were underwater a few months ago and will be underwater again soon. Herons stand motionless on these bars, patient as statues, watching for fish. A crocodile rests on a mudflat downstream, its jaws slightly parted, utterly still. And here, in a small wooden boat with a curved prow and a single patched sail, we find Renzi. He is a man in his middle 40s, broad-shouldered and lean, with deep lines around his eyes from years of squinting against the glare of sun on water. His skin is the color of oiled cedar, and his hands, large, scarred, perpetually calloused, move across the ropes and nets of his boat with an ease that suggests he could do this work in his sleep, and probably has. Renzi is a fisherman. He has been a fisherman since he was old enough to hold a throwing net, taught by his father, Amenhotep, who was taught by his father before him. The boat he sits in now is the same boat his father built, repaired and patched many times over, its hull rubbed smooth by decades of river water, but still sound, still faithful. Renzi sometimes runs his hand along the gunwale the way another man might touch a familiar wall in his own home. This morning he is checking his traps, woven baskets of reed and palm fiber that he set the evening before in the shallows near a sandbar where the tilapia gather in the low water. He pulls the first trap up and finds 3 good-sized fish inside, their scales flashing silver and blue-green as they flex against the wicker. He transfers them to a wet reed basket in the bottom of the boat, murmuring something low and steady as he does. Not quite a prayer, not quite a conversation, but something in between. Renzi has always talked to the river, or perhaps it is more accurate to say that he talks in the presence of the river, the way one speaks in the presence of an old friend who does not need to answer for the words to matter. He learned this from his father. Amenhotep had believed that the river was alive, not merely in the way that water moves and fish swim, but alive in the deeper sense, possessing a kind of awareness, a vast, slow intelligence that could be felt but never fully understood. When Renzi was a boy, his father would wake him before dawn, and they would push off from the bank together into the gray half-light, and his father would be quiet for a long time, just listening to the water against the hull, to the birds beginning to call in the reeds, to the sound the current made as it moved around a submerged rock or a fallen palm trunk. And then, after a while, his father would say something like, "The fish are south today," or "The perch are deep, we will need the long nets." And he was almost always right. Not because he possessed any supernatural gift, but because he had spent so many years on this water that its rhythms had become his own. The river had taught him, and he had been willing to learn. Renzi carries this inheritance quietly. He does not think of himself as wise or gifted, or anything other than a man who does what his father did, and what his father's father did before that. But he reads the river with an intuition that others in Jarrett have come to respect. They know that when Renzi says the flood will come early, it will come early. When he says the catfish are running north, the catfish are running north. He does not explain how he knows. He simply knows. Today, however, his thoughts are not on the fish. He is preparing for a journey. In a few days, he will set off southward, following the tilapia as they migrate upstream toward the deeper, cooler waters near the cataracts. It is a journey he makes every year at this time, when the river is low and the fish are concentrated and the towns along the upper Nile are hungry for fresh catch. He will be gone for several weeks, stopping at settlements along the way to sell his fish, to trade, to visit the handful of people he has come to know over years of making this same passage. It is a solitary journey, but Renzi does not mind solitude. He has lived alone since his wife left him many years ago, a quiet parting without bitterness between two people who had simply discovered they wanted different lives. He has no children. His father is gone. His boat and his nets and the long, slow river are his closest companions. He pulls the second trap from the water, 4 more tilapia, good ones, and sets his course for the landing at Jarrett to sell the morning's catch before the heat arrives. The town is waking now. Imagine the sounds of it, the low murmur of voices from behind courtyard walls, the clatter of clay pots, the braying of a donkey tethered near the market square, the rhythmic slap of wet linen as a woman washes clothes on a flat stone near the canal. Children's voices rise and fall in the narrow lanes between the houses, and somewhere a man is singing, a low, unhurried song, the kind that has no real beginning or end, just a melody that turns over and over like a wheel. In a small workshop on the eastern side of town, not far from the temple precinct, a young man named Khafra is already at work. His workshop is a single room with thick mud brick walls and a low ceiling, deliberately built to stay cool. A narrow doorway lets in a blade of morning light, and in that light you can see shelves lined with small clay jars and stone vessels, bundles of dried herbs hanging from wooden pegs, a grinding stone worn smooth in its center, and a wide, shallow basin of rendered animal fat, pale and waxy, in which dark petals are slowly steeping. Khafra is a perfume maker. He is perhaps 28 years old, slender and fine-featured, with careful hands that move among his materials with the precision of a musician tuning an instrument. He did not choose this trade so much as fall into it. As a boy, he ran errands for an aging perfumer named Senefer, carrying deliveries to the temple and to the homes of wealthier families, and over time Senefer had begun to teach him. The old man had no sons of his own, and he recognized in Khafra a sensitivity to scent that went beyond the ordinary. Khafra could distinguish between two batches of myrrh resin harvested from different trees. He could tell, by smell alone, whether a jar of moringa oil had been pressed that season or the one before. Senefer had died 2 years ago, and Khafra had inherited the workshop, the recipes, and the quietly important role the perfumer plays in a town like Jarrat. This morning he is preparing a batch of lily perfume, a delicate, time-consuming process that Senefer had taught him with great care. He begins by warming a measure of balanos oil in a shallow stone dish set over a small clay brazier. The heat must be gentle, enough to soften the oil and open it to receive the scent, but not so much that it smokes or loses its clarity. While the oil warms, Khafra takes a basket of blue lotus petals gathered at dawn from the canal pools before the sun could wilt them, and begins layering them into the fat in the steeping basin. He presses each layer down with his palm, feeling the cool, faintly waxy surface of the petals against his skin. The fragrance rises immediately, sweet, aquatic, almost hypnotic, like the smell of cool water and honey and something faintly green and growing. Blue lotus is sacred in Egypt. Its flowers open at dawn and close at dusk, and for this reason it is associated with rebirth, with the sun's daily journey, with the possibility that all things lost may return. Khafra knows this, not because he is a particularly devout man, but because scent and the sacred are woven so tightly together in this world that one cannot work with one and ignore the other. Every temple ceremony requires incense, great quantities of frankincense and myrrh, burned on wide bronze dishes until the sanctuary fills with fragrant smoke. Every funeral preparation calls for oils and unguents to anoint the body for its journey into the West. Every feast, every wedding, every offering to the gods involves some form of perfume. Khafra's trade places him at the heart of these rituals, even though he himself stands at the edges of them, a craftsman, not a priest, a maker of sacred things who is not himself considered sacred. This is something he thinks about more than he would admit. Later today he will carry a delivery of temple incense to the sanctuary of Osiris, small cones of Kiphi, the famous compound incense made from 16 ingredients, including raisins, frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and sweet wine, all pounded and blended according to a recipe so old that no one remembers who first composed it. He will enter the outer court of the temple, hand the basket to a junior priest, receive his payment in grain and linen, and leave. He will not be invited inside. He will not be asked to stay, and he will walk home through the market with the smell of the sacred still on his hands, wondering, as he often does, what it would be like to be welcomed into those inner rooms, not as a deliveryman, but as someone who belongs. But that is for later. For now there is the lotus, and the oil, and the quiet work of his hands. And in his workshop, surrounded by the accumulated fragrances of his craft, Khafra is, for a little while, entirely at peace. Let us move now through the waking town, past the market where vendors are beginning to set out their goods, baskets of figs and dates, rounds of bread, bundles of green onion, small clay pots of beer, and towards the temple precinct, where the mud brick walls are taller and the lanes are quieter, and the air carries a faint trace of incense, even now, hours before the midday offering. Near the outer wall of the temple compound, in a small, clean room with whitewashed walls and a single window that looks out onto a courtyard with a sycamore tree, there lives a woman named Takayet. She is in her mid-60s, old by the standards of this time and place, with white hair cropped close to her head and a face that is deeply lined but still alert, still watchful, the way a heron's face is watchful even when the bird appears to be resting. Takayet is a dream interpreter. She holds no formal title within the temple hierarchy, but she occupies a role that is both ancient and respected. People come to her with their dreams, and she helps them understand what the dreams might mean. She does this with the aid of a papyrus scroll, a copy of a much older text, the Book of Dreams, which catalogues hundreds of dream images and their interpretations. If a man dreams of seeing himself with a large face, this means good fortune. If he dreams of drinking warm beer, this means suffering will come. If he dreams of catching birds, this means he will lose something of value. The entries are formulaic and direct, but Takayet has learned, over decades of practice, that the scroll is only a starting point. The true work of dream interpretation lies in listening, in understanding the life of the person sitting before you, and in feeling for the connections between the dream and the dreamer that no text can fully capture. It is to Takayet's room that a young woman named Baket comes on this particular morning. Baket is 17, nearly 18, that uncertain age when childhood has ended but adulthood has not quite begun. She is slight, with large, expressive eyes, and a habit of fidgeting with the hem of her dress when she is nervous. Her father is a soldier, stationed somewhere far to the south, at one of the garrison towns near the border with Kush. He has been away for years, returning only twice that Baket can remember. Her mother is a busy, distracted woman with 3 younger children to manage, and while she is not unkind, she does not have much time or attention left over for Baket's questions about the world. And Baket has questions. She feels them pressing inside her like water against a dam. Questions about what she is meant to do with her life, about what kind of person she is becoming, about whether the restlessness she feels is a sign that something is wrong with her or a sign that something is waiting to be found. She does not know how to ask these questions directly, but last night she had a dream, a vivid, strange dream, and it has given her a reason to come here. She stands in Takayet's doorway, hesitant. The older woman is seated on a low stool near the window, her papyrus scroll open across her knees, and she looks up with an expression that is neither surprised nor particularly welcoming, but simply open, available. She gestures for Baket to sit. Baket sits on the packed earth floor, cross-legged, and begins to describe her dream. She speaks haltingly at first, then with more confidence. In the dream, she tells Takayet, she was standing at the edge of the river, but the river was not water. It was light, a flowing, shimmering light, green and gold, that moved like water but made no sound. And across this river of light there was a door, a wooden door standing alone in the middle of the current with no wall around it. She wanted to open the door. She walked toward it, but the closer she got, the farther away it seemed, and she woke with her hand outstretched, reaching for something that was not there. Takayat listens without interrupting. When Baket finishes, the older woman is quiet for a long moment. She does not immediately consult her scroll. Instead, she asks a question, a gentle one, almost casual. She asks Baket what she felt when she saw the door, not what she thought, but what she felt. Baket considers this. She says she felt longing, and then, more quietly, she says she felt afraid, not of the door itself, but of what might be behind it, of what it might ask of her. Takayat nods slowly. She tells Baket that water in dreams, or light that behaves like water, often speaks of change, of something flowing toward the dreamer that cannot be stopped or turned back. And a door, she says, is always an invitation, even when it seems unreachable. She tells Baket that the dream does not mean she must find the door today or tomorrow. It means only that the door exists, and that some part of her already knows this. She suggests that Baket pay attention in the coming days and weeks to the moments when she feels that same longing, that pull toward something she cannot yet name. Those moments, Takayat says, are the dream continuing to speak. Baket leaves feeling not resolved exactly but lighter, as though something that had been knotted inside her has loosened slightly. She walks home through the brightening streets, past the market, past the canal where women are washing linen, past a group of children playing with a leather ball in the dust, and she feels, for the first time in a long while, a small, quiet sense of possibility. And back in her room, Takayat rolls up her scroll and sits for a moment in the silence. She is thinking about the girl. There is something in Baket that reminds her of herself at that age. The same restlessness, the same hunger for meaning, the same sense of standing at the edge of something vast and not knowing whether to step forward or stay still. Takayat had found her own way, eventually. She had learned to listen to dreams, to the quiet voices that speak in the spaces between waking and sleeping, to the patterns that repeat and repeat until they are finally understood. She hopes the girl will find her way, too. These things cannot be rushed. They unfold in their own time, like the river, like the seasons, like the slow turning of the stars. A few days pass. The heat continues steady and immense, and the town moves through its daily rhythms with the unhurried patience of a place that has known 10,000 summers just like this one. Fields lie fallow, waiting. The canal water is low and warm. Palm shadows stretch long across the lanes in the early morning and again in the late afternoon, and in between, the world is white with light. On a morning like any other, Nefret walks into town carrying a clay jar of honey. She has harvested a small amount from one of her strongest hives, carefully using smoke from a bundle of dried cow dung to calm the bees, then lifting out sections of comb and draining the golden liquid into a jar. The honey is thick, dark amber, and faintly floral from the acacia blossoms the bees had been foraging before the flowers dried up. It is beautiful, and Nefret carries it with the understated pride of someone who knows the value of what she has made, or rather, what her bees have made and what she has helped to bring forth. Her first stop is Khafra's workshop. The perfume maker uses honey in certain preparations, balms for the skin, a medicinal ointment that the local healer prescribes for burns, and occasionally as an ingredient in the embalming unguents he prepares for families who can afford proper burial goods. Honey does not spoil. It holds within itself a kind of permanence that makes it sacred, suitable for offerings to the gods, for sealing wounds, for preserving what might otherwise be lost. Nefret thinks of this as she walks, and it gives her a quiet satisfaction. Her bees make something that endures. Khafra is in his workshop grinding cinnamon bark in his stone mortar when Nefret arrives. The smell is extraordinary, warm, spicy, faintly sweet, and it mingles with the residual scent of blue lotus from his steeping basin and the ever-present bass note of rendered fat and moringa oil. His workshop smells the way a dream of abundance might smell, if dreams had fragrance. He looks up when Nefret appears in the doorway, and his face softens into a genuine smile. They have known each other for years, not intimately, but with the steady, low-frequency familiarity of two people who live in the same small town and whose trades occasionally bring them together. Nefret sets the honey jar on his work table, and Khafra examines it with the attentive seriousness he gives to all his materials. He holds it up to the light from the doorway, tilts it, watches the honey move, slow, thick, catching the light like amber glass. He tells her it is good, very good. The acacia gives it a clarity that he can work with. They talk for a while. Their conversation is easy and unforced, the kind of talk that happens between people who share a similar station in life and a similar relationship to their work. Nefret asks about his temple deliveries, and Khafra tells her about the kefai he prepared last week, about the particular difficulty of getting the proportions right, about how the junior priest who received the delivery had barely looked at him. He says this without bitterness, but there is something in his voice, a small, wry note, that Nefret recognizes. She knows what it is like to do work that matters, and to have that work taken for granted. Her honey goes into temple offerings, too, placed on stone altars before the image of Osiris, and no one has ever asked her name. She tells him something her husband's mother once told her, that the bees do not work for praise. They work because the work is in their nature, and the hive endures because each bee does what it was made to do without needing to be seen or thanked. It is a small philosophy drawn from a life spent watching insects, but it contains within it something larger, a reflection of Ma'at, that foundational principle that runs beneath everything in Egyptian life like groundwater beneath the soil. Ma'at is balance, order, the rightness of things. It is the feather against which every heart will one day be weighed. And it is also, in its simplest form, the idea that meaning comes not from recognition, but from the faithful performance of one's role, however humble. Khafra listens to this, and something in him quiets. He does not say so. He simply nods and thanks her for the honey, and offers her a small jar of scented oil in return, a balm of moringa and myrrh that is good for the hands. Nefret accepts it with a slight dip of her head, and they part. A small exchange, a small connection. The kind of moment that barely registers in the larger story of a town, but that holds within its simplicity the substance of what it means to live among others and to be known. Renzi sets off on a morning when the air is so still that the river looks like polished bronze. He has loaded his boat with dried fish, a few jars of salted roe, his nets and traps, a rolled sleeping mat, a sack of bread and dried dates, and a clay jug of beer. It is not much. He does not need much. The river will provide, as it always has. Picture him now, if you will, moving slowly upstream against the gentle current. His sail is raised to catch the north wind. The prevailing wind in Egypt blows from north to south, conveniently opposite to the river's flow, so that a boat can sail upstream and drift back down. It is one of those small, elegant facts of geography that seems almost designed, as though the gods had arranged the wind and the water specifically so that people could move freely along this narrow ribbon of life between the deserts. The landscape unrolls on either side of him like a painted scroll. To the east, the cultivated strip, narrow here, wider there, runs along the bank in shades of brown and gold, the stubble of harvested fields giving way occasionally to a stand of date palms or a patch of green where someone has managed to irrigate a garden. To the west, the land rises toward the desert, pale and heat-hazed, the cliffs catching the light and glowing faintly pink in the early morning. Birds are everywhere. Herons, ibises, kingfishers, cormorants perched on rocks with their wings spread to dry. A flock of white egrets lifts off from a mudflat as Renzi passes, rising in a slow, spiraling column before settling again 100 paces upstream. He fishes as he travels, setting traps at each overnight stop and checking them in the morning. The tilapia are moving as he expected, gathering in the cooler, deeper pools as the river contracts. He catches well, enough to sell at the small settlements he passes, where a few families have clustered around a canal head or a ferry crossing. He trades fish for bread, for beer, for a handful of dried lentils. He sleeps on the river bank under the stars, his boat pulled up beside him, the sound of the water a constant, gentle companion. On the third day, he reaches the settlement where old Mahu lives. Mahu is a reed cutter, a man who has spent his entire life in the marshes, harvesting papyrus and bulrushes for rope, for basket weaving, for the paper-like writing material that scribes use throughout the land. He is very old now. No one is quite sure how old, least of all Mahu himself, with a face like crumpled linen and hands that are permanently stained green from the reed juice. He was a friend of Renzi's father, and Renzi has stopped to see him on every upriver journey for as long as he can remember. They sit together on the bank in the late afternoon, sharing a meal of bread and dried fish, and a few precious onions that Mahu has grown in a tiny garden behind his hut. The marshes stretch out before them, a world of tall green reeds and open water, and the constant musical chatter of birds. Mahu talks about the marsh the way Renzi's father used to talk about the river, as a living thing, a presence, something that speaks to those who are patient enough to listen. He tells Renzi that the ibises came late this year. He tells him that the papyrus is shorter than it used to be, that the deep stands where he cut as a young man have thinned and retreated. These observations are delivered without alarm, without complaint, simply as facts, noted by a man who has been paying attention to the same stretch of earth for longer than most people have been alive. They talk about Renzi's father. Mahu tells a story Renzi has heard before, about a time when Amenhotep capsized his boat in a sudden storm and swam to shore laughing, dragging his nets behind him, refusing to lose a single one. Renzi smiles. He has heard this story many times, and each time it gives him the same quiet warmth, not because the story is remarkable, but because hearing it keeps his father's voice alive in the world for a little while longer. This, too, is a form of Ma'kat, the continuity of memory, the passing of stories from one life to the next, the way the dead remain present in the words of those who loved them. Renzi stays the night. In the morning, Mahu gives him a bundle of fresh-cut reeds, good ones, strong and flexible, suitable for repairing fish traps. Renzi accepts them with thanks and pushes off into the current, heading further south. Behind him, the old man raises a hand in farewell and then turns back toward his marshes, where the birds are already calling. And then, one morning, it begins. No one can say exactly when it starts. The flood does not announce itself with thunder or spectacle. It arrives the way dawn arrives, gradually, silently, as a slow change in the quality of things. Someone notices that the water at the canal head is a shade darker than it was yesterday. A woman washing clothes at the river's edge remarks that the bank seems a hand's width narrower than it was last week. A farmer walking his field at dusk finds a thin sheet of water where there had been only dry, cracked earth that morning. The river is rising. In Jarrat, the news passes from house to house like a warm current of air. The flood is coming. Everyone has been waiting for this. The whole town, the whole valley, the whole long parched land from the cataracts to the delta. The annual inundation is the heartbeat of Egyptian life. Without it there is no silt, no soil, no harvest, no life. With it the world is made new. The fields are drowned, and when the waters recede, they leave behind a layer of rich, black earth, the Kemet, the black land from which Egypt takes its very name. It is a miracle that happens every year, as regular as the turning of the sun, and yet it never entirely loses its capacity to inspire wonder. The color of the water changes first. The green-brown of the low river begins to shift toward a deeper, reddish hue. The color of the soil from the distant highlands far to the south, where rains have been falling for weeks, sending their runoff northward through 1,000 tributaries until the Nile itself is stained with the essence of another country's earth. The smell changes too. There is a new richness in the air along the river bank. A dark, fertile, almost sweet smell, like the smell of wet earth after a long drought, but deeper, more complex, carrying within it the promise of everything that will grow. Nefret watches the water from the path near her apiary, and she feels the change before she sees it. The bees feel it too. She is certain of this. In the days before the flood arrives, her hives grow more active, as though the colonies can sense the shift in humidity, the invisible moisture creeping into the air from the rising river. She begins to move her hive platforms to higher ground, carrying each heavy clay cylinder up the slope to a terrace she has prepared, working steadily through the cool hours of the morning and evening. It is hard labor, and she does it alone, but she does not resent it. This is what the season asks of her, and she answers. In his workshop, Khafra notices the change in the air the way a musician notices a change in key. The humidity affects his work. The steeping fats absorb moisture differently, the dried resins soften slightly, the fragrances bloom and shift. He adjusts his processes instinctively, the way Renzi adjusts his nets to the changing current. There is a shared quality between all people who work closely with natural materials, an attentiveness to subtle changes, a willingness to adapt, a respect for the forces that are larger than oneself. Beckett watches the river from the bank on the evening the water first spills over the levee into the low fields. She stands barefoot at the edge of the town, where a packed earth path leads down to the water, and she watches the slow, silent advance of the flood across the dry ground. It is mesmerizing. The water moves with a kind of patient inevitability, filling every crack and depression, finding every low point, spreading outward like a hand opening. Small things are swallowed, a clump of dried grass, a beetle making its way across the mud, a line of footprints left by a child. The world is being erased and rewritten, and Beckett feels, watching it, a strange echo of her dream, the river of light, the sense of something vast and unstoppable flowing toward her. She mentions this to Takayet the next day during one of their conversations. The older woman listens and nods. She tells Beckett that the flood is the land's oldest story, the story of loss and renewal, of the old world being washed away so that a new one can emerge. She says that the Nile does not grieve for the dry earth it covers, and the dry earth does not resist the water that comes to claim it. They are part of the same cycle, the same turning. She tells Beckett that there may be a lesson in this, that sometimes the things we are most afraid of losing are the very things that need to be released in order for something new to grow. And somewhere on the river, miles to the south, Renzi feels the flood beneath his hull. The current quickens, the water deepens and changes color. He knows what this means. The fish will scatter now, moving into the newly flooded fields where the water is shallow and warm and rich with the small organisms that the flood stirs up. The deep water fishing of the low season is ending. A different kind of abundance is beginning. He turns his boat northward and lets the strengthening current carry him home. The flood reaches its fullness and the world transforms. Where there were fields, there is now a vast shallow lake, brown and glinting, stretching from the river's edge to the base of the desert hills. The town of Jarret stands on its slight rise of ground like an island, its mud-brick houses reflected in the still water that has crept up to the edges of the lower lanes. Palm trees rise from the flood like columns in a half-submerged temple. Birds gather in enormous numbers, flocks of ducks and geese settle on the water, and the air is filled with their calls, a constant layered chorus that is chaotic up close but resolves, at a distance, into a kind of music. Life slows. The fields cannot be worked. The flood will stay for weeks, 2 months, perhaps 3, and during this time, the rhythms of the town shift. People repair their homes, mend their tools, weave baskets, brew beer, visit with neighbors. There is more leisure now than at any other time of the year, and with it comes a certain expansiveness, a loosening of the usual routines, a willingness to sit and talk and let the hours pass without urgency. It is during this quiet time that Renzi returns to Jarret. He ties his boat at the landing. The water is high enough now that the landing is barely above the surface, and walks into town with a basket of fresh perch slung over his shoulder. He sells most of them at the market, where the vendors are glad to have fresh river fish, and then, on an impulse he does not fully examine, he walks to the edge of town and out along the path toward the acacia grove. He finds Nefret at her hives, which now sit on their higher ground, well above the floodwater. She is standing among them, watching the bees come and go, and she turns when she hears his footsteps on the path. They have met before. Jarret is a small town, and everyone knows everyone, but they have never spoken at length. Renzi holds up a fish, a good-sized perch, and offers it to her. A simple gift, the kind of thing a neighbor might do. Nefret accepts it with a slight surprised smile. She invites him to sit in the shade of the acacias, and she brings out a small dish of honey cakes, flat rounds of barley bread soaked in honey, a simple recipe that her husband's mother taught her, and a jar of cool water. They sit and they talk, not about anything of great importance, about the flood, about the bees, about Rensi's journey upriver. He tells her about old Mahu and the thinning papyrus, and she tells him about the peculiar behavior of one of her hives, which has been building comb in a spiral pattern she has never seen before. They talk about the heat, about the quality of this year's barley, about a neighbor's new baby. It is the kind of conversation that means almost nothing on the surface and almost everything beneath it. Two people, each carrying their own solitudes, discovering that there is ease between them, a recognition, a comfort. Nefret finds herself telling Rensi about her husband, not sadly, but with the quiet, settled tone of someone who has made peace with grief. She tells him that her husband was a good man, a gentleman who made fine sandals and who used to sing while he worked. She tells him that after he died, the silence in her house was so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat, and that it was the bees that saved her, their constant, purposeful hum filling the emptiness, giving her something to tend, something that needed her presence each morning and each evening without fail. Rensi listens to this in the way he listens to everything, fully, without interruption, with a stillness that is not passivity, but attention. When she finishes, he is quiet for a moment, and then he tells her that after his father died, he used to go out on the river at night, alone, and just sit in the boat in the darkness, listening to the water. He says that it was not exactly comforting. It was more that the river did not need him to be anything other than what he was. It did not need him to grieve in any particular way, or to be strong, or to understand. It simply flowed, and he sat in it, and that was enough. Nefret looks at him, really looks at him, and something passes between them that neither of them names. It is not love, not yet. It is something quieter and perhaps more durable, a mutual recognition of the same quality of steadiness, the same relationship to silence, the same willingness to find meaning in the small, repeating rituals of ordinary life. Rensi comes back the next evening, and the one after that. He brings fish. She gives him honey cakes. They sit in the shade of the acacias as the floodwater glints in the lowering sun, and they talk, or sometimes they simply sit in companionable silence, watching the bees return to their hives in the amber light. It is the beginning of something, though neither of them calls it that. It is simply what it is. Two people choosing each other's company again and again for no reason other than the gentle pleasure of being understood. During the stillness of the flood season, word reaches Khafra of a commission. A wealthy family, administrators connected to the temple of Osiris at Abydos, is preparing for the burial of an elderly patriarch. They require fine oils and unguents for the wrapping of the body, cedarwood oil, juniper resin, a blend of myrrh and cinnamon in a base of rendered fat, and a special anointing oil made with frankincense and moringa for the final sealing of the linen bands. It is the largest and most prestigious commission Khafra has ever received. He accepts it with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The materials alone will cost him nearly everything he has saved. Frankincense and myrrh are imported from the distant land of Punt carried by caravan across the eastern desert to the Red Sea ports and then overland to the Nile towns, and their price reflects every mile of that journey. But the commission also represents an opportunity. If he does this well, the family may speak of him to others. His name may reach the ears of people who could offer him more work, more standing, a life that is something more than a small workshop and a daily round of modest deliveries. He works on the commission for days, grinding and measuring and heating and blending with obsessive care. The cedar wood oil must be pure, free of any taint of moisture or mold. The myrrh resin must be crushed to exactly the right fineness. Too coarse and it will not dissolve properly in the fat. Too fine and its fragrance will dissipate too quickly. The kaifi he prepares for the fumigation of the burial chamber requires 16 ingredients, each added in a specific order at a specific stage of the blending process, because the ingredient added last will be the most pungent and will determine the overall character of the scent. He follows Senefer's old recipes with reverent precision, and when he is unsure, he trusts his nose, that extraordinary trained sensitivity that is his truest gift. When the oils are ready, he carries them to the family's house, a large, well-appointed mud brick compound near the temple, with painted walls and a garden courtyard where a small ornamental pool reflects the sky. A servant leads him through the outer rooms to a receiving hall where 2 members of the family are waiting, a middle-aged woman, the daughter of the deceased, and her husband, a temple administrator with careful eyes and a measured way of speaking. Khafra presents his work. He opens each jar and vessel in turn, inviting them to examine the color, the consistency, the fragrance. The woman leans close to the jar of anointing oil and inhales, and something in her face changes, softens, and she speaks quietly to her husband. She tells Khafra that the scent reminds her of her father's house when she was a child, when the rooms were always fragrant with cedar wood and myrrh, and Khafra feels a small, unexpected swell of emotion at this, at the idea that his work has touched something real and personal in another person's memory. The husband examines the preparations with a more clinical eye, checking quantities and consistency, and seems satisfied. He pays Khafra in grain and linen, generously, more than Khafra had expected. And then, as Khafra is gathering his things to leave, the woman asks him a question. She asks where he learned his craft and how long he has been practicing, and whether he has ever considered supplying the temple directly rather than through intermediaries. She speaks to him with genuine curiosity, as though he is a person with a story, not simply a tradesman delivering goods. It is a small moment, but Khafra carries it with him as he walks home through the flooded lanes of Jarret, the evening light turning the water around him to copper and rose. He thinks about Nefret's words, the ones she spoke about the bees, about doing the work that is in your nature without needing to be seen. He thinks about Senefer, the old perfumer who taught him everything and who had spent his entire life in the same small workshop, never wealthy, never celebrated, but deeply, quietly satisfied with the skill of his hands and the quality of what they produced. Khafra wonders if that is enough. He wonders if he wants it to be enough, or if the wanting itself, the ambition, the hunger for more, is also part of who he is, also part of the work he is meant to do. He does not reach an answer, but the question sits within him like a seed in damp earth, and he suspects that, like all seeds, it will eventually show him what it is meant to become. The floodwaters have reached their highest point, and now they hold and hold like a long, slow breath. The world is still. The fields are submerged. The air is heavy with moisture and the smell of wet earth and green growing things. Already, small shoots of grass and weed are emerging at the waterline, pushing up through the saturated soil with the blind, insistent energy of all new life. Nefret tends her hives in this quiet time. The bees are foraging in the flooded margins where new flowers have begun to bloom, the pale star-shaped blossoms of water lilies, the tiny yellow flowers of a creeping vine that grows along the higher ground. The colonies are strong. The queen in each hive is laying well, and the workers are building new comb, filling the cells with honey and pollen, raising the next generation of bees with the same tireless communal devotion that their kind has practiced since the tears of Ra first touched the earth. Nefret is thinking about continuity this morning. She is thinking about the way a hive persists, how individual bees live only a few weeks, but the colony endures for years, for generations, each bee contributing its small labor to the larger whole and then dying quietly, without ceremony, making room for the next. She finds this comforting rather than sad. It is the way of things. It is ma'at at its most fundamental. The understanding that no single life is the whole story, that meaning comes from participation in something that continues beyond oneself. She thinks about her husband. She thinks about him less often now than she did in the first year after his death, and this too she accepts without guilt. Grief, she has learned, is not a betrayal of love. It is a season like any other, and like any other season, it passes, not into forgetting, but into something gentler, a kind of fond, settled remembrance that lives alongside the daily business of being alive. She remembers his hands, which were clever and careful with the leather he worked. She remembers his voice, which had a low, warm quality, like the hum of the hives themselves. She believes that he is in the field of reeds now, that beautiful, eternal place that the Egyptians imagine as the afterlife, a land of green fields and clear water and gentle breezes, where the dead live on in a perfected version of the life they knew on earth. She believes this not because she has been told to believe it, but because she has stood at the edge of the river and watched the water carry the silt southward, and the wind carry the birds northward, and the sun rise and set and rise again, and it seems to her that nothing in this world is ever truly lost. It only changes form. A neighbor stops by her hives one afternoon, a young mother with a baby on her hip and a toddler clutching her skirt. The woman wants to buy a small jar of honey for a cake she is making, and Nefret fills one for her. They talk for a while, standing in the dappled shade of the acacias, about the usual things, the flood, the children, the coming planting season. And then the neighbor asks Nefret, almost shyly, whether she believes the dead can hear the living. Her own mother has recently died, and the woman has been speaking to her at night, whispering into the darkness of her sleeping room, and she wants to know if Nefret thinks these words are heard. Nefret considers this for a moment. Then she says simply that she does not know if the dead hear our words, but she believes they are near, closer than we think, woven into the fabric of the living world in ways we do not fully understand. She says that when she tends her hives and the bees hum and the honey flows and the sun comes through the leaves, she feels her husband's presence, not as a ghost, not as a voice, but as a quality of warmth in the air, a sense that the order of the world still holds, still includes him, still makes room for all the love that was given and received. And she says that perhaps that is what it means to speak to the dead, not that they hear the words themselves, but that the act of speaking keeps the connection alive, keeps the thread unbroken between this world and the one that lies beyond it. The neighbor nods, and her eyes are bright. She thanks Nefret for the honey and goes home, and Nefret stands among her hives for a while longer, listening to the bees, feeling the warm air on her skin, watching the light move across the surface of the floodwater in the fields below. The world hums with its quiet, ancient music, and she is part of it, and that is enough. That has always been enough. The floodwaters begin to recede. It happens slowly, a finger's width of bank exposed each day, a thin line of dark, wet earth appearing at the water's edge where yesterday there was only water. The mud is black and rich and so fertile that you can almost see things growing in it. And indeed, within days of the water pulling back, green shoots appear everywhere, pushing up through the silt in dense, exuberant carpets of new growth. Renzi has been staying in Jarrett, fishing the flooded fields with nets and basket traps. But now, as the waters drop and the fish begin to concentrate again in the main channel, he prepares for a shorter journey downstream. He needs to sell the dried fish he has been accumulating, and his boat has developed a crack in its hull that needs attention, a repair he cannot do himself, but which an old friend can manage. He says goodbye to Nefret the evening before he leaves. They stand at the water's edge near the landing, the sky above them enormous and deepening toward violet, and their conversation is easy, unhurried, touching on nothing of great consequence, and yet somehow conveying everything that matters. He tells her he will be back in 10 days, perhaps less. She tells him she will keep a jar of honey aside for him. There is a pause, the kind of pause between two people who are aware that something is growing between them and who are choosing, with mutual, unspoken care, to let it grow at its own pace. Renzi pushes off at dawn, drifting north with the current, and the journey downstream is gentle. The river is still high, and the boat moves easily, carried by water that has lost the urgent force of the peak flood, but that still flows with a generous, purposeful energy. The landscape along the banks is transformed. Where a month ago the land was dusty and dry, it is now a luminous green, the new growth shining in the sunlight like emerald. He stops at a river town, a day's journey north, where his friend Dedi lives. Dedi is a boat builder, a large, jovial man with enormous hands and a laugh that can be heard across the water. He has been building and repairing boats his entire life, working with acacia wood and sycamore planks, sealing the seams with a mixture of plant fiber and resin. His workshop is an open-air structure on the bank, sheltered by a palm leaf awning, and it is littered with tools, copper chisels, mallets, planes, coils of rope, pots of black sealing pitch. Dedi examines Renzi's hull with the expert eye of a man who has seen 10,000 cracks and knows which ones are serious and which are merely cosmetic. He determines that the crack is minor but worth fixing. He heats a pot of pitch over a small fire, and while they wait for it to soften, they share a jar of beer, thick, sweet, faintly grainy, brewed from barley and flavored with dates, the way most beer is made in the towns along the river. They talk, as old friends do, about the same things they have always talked about: the river, the fish, the flood, the small dramas and comedies of life in their respective towns. Dedi asks Renzi how he is. not casually, but with the directness of a man who has known him for years and who can tell that something has changed. Renzi is quiet for a moment, and then he tells Dedi about Nefret. Not much, just the outlines, the honey cakes, the evenings by the hives, the way she listens. Dedi grins and says nothing for a moment, and then he tells Renzi that he is glad. He says this simply, without teasing, without elaboration. He is glad. They seal the hull and share another jar of beer, and in the morning Renzi pushes off again, heading back toward Jarret. The river carries him south, and the warm wind fills his sail, and the light lies on the water in long, trembling sheets of gold. He thinks about his father, as he often does on the river. He thinks about what Amenhotep would have made of Nefret, and he knows, with a certainty that is as deep and as quiet as the river itself, that his father would have approved. Not because Nefret is remarkable in any extraordinary way, but because she is steady and she is kind, and she does her work in the world with the same quiet faithfulness that Amenhotep had always valued above all other qualities. Renzi thinks about what it means to begin something new in the middle of one's life. He is not a young man. The years behind him are more than the years ahead, and he has spent most of them alone on this river, content in his solitude, asking nothing of the world that the world was not already giving. And yet here is this new thing, this unexpected warmth, this quiet pull toward another person, and it does not feel like a departure from his life. It feels like a deepening of it, as though the river has always been carrying him toward this, and he simply did not know it until now. The waters recede, and the black earth is revealed. It is one of the most beautiful things in the natural world, this annual unveiling, this emergence of new ground from beneath the flood. The soil is dark as charcoal, rich as cream, and so moist that a person walking across it leaves deep footprints that fill slowly with water. It smells of life itself, of minerals and decaying plant matter, and the accumulated richness of 1,000 miles of river. It is the soil that feeds the nation, the foundation upon which everything is built, and when the people of Jarret walk out into their newly revealed fields for the first time, there is a quality of reverence in their step, as though they are walking on something holy, and in a sense they are. The Kemet, the black land, is the gift of the river, and the river is the gift of the gods, and the turning of the seasons that brings the flood and the soil and the harvest is the expression of Ma'at in its grandest form, the cosmic order that sustains all life, that keeps the sun moving across the sky, and the stars turning in their courses, and the dead resting peacefully in their fields of reeds. Planting begins almost immediately. It is communal work. Everyone participates. Farmers guide their ox-drawn plows through the soft earth, turning the soil, preparing it for seed. Women and children follow behind, scattering barley and emmer wheat from baskets, pressing the seeds into the furrows with their feet. The air is full of voices, of the lowing of cattle, of the creak of wooden plows and the rhythmic thud of hoes. It is hard work, and it is joyful work, and the whole town bends to it together with a shared sense of purpose that is one of the quiet glories of this place and time. Nefret moves her hives back down to the lower ground near the newly planted fields. The bees will pollinate the crops. Though the Egyptians do not understand the mechanics of pollination in the way that later centuries will, they have observed over generations that fields near apiaries produce better harvests, and they value the beekeeper's role accordingly. Nefret sets her hives in a row along the field's edge, and within hours the bees are out, moving among the freshly turned earth and the first tender shoots of green, doing their ancient, essential work. Khafra helps in the fields, too. Everyone does. For a few days, the perfume maker sets aside his mortar and pestle and works alongside farmers and fishermen and potters and weavers, bending and planting under the same sun. There is something leveling about this work, something that temporarily dissolves the small distinctions of trade and status that organize the town's daily life. Khafra finds himself working beside a temple priest who, outside the fields, would barely acknowledge him, and here they are, shoulder to shoulder, pressing barley into the dark earth, sharing water from the same jar. It is not a permanent transformation. Tomorrow the priest will return to his sanctuary and Khafra to his workshop, and the distance between them will reassert itself. But today, for a few hours, they are simply two men doing the same necessary work, and there is a kind of grace in that. Bakit is in the fields too. She works with energy and enthusiasm, and there is something different about her, a confidence, a settledness that was not there a few months ago. Her conversations with Takayet have continued throughout the flood season, growing deeper and more searching with each visit. They have talked about Ma'at, about purpose, about the difference between what the world expects of you and what your own nature asks. Takayet has told her stories, old stories, drawn from the wisdom texts that the temple scribes preserve, about people who found their paths late, or unexpectedly, or in ways that no one could have predicted. And Bakit has listened and thought, and slowly, quietly, begun to feel the shape of her own life emerging from the uncertainty that had surrounded it. She visits Takayet on the evening after the first day of planting, her hands still black with soil, her face tired and bright. She tells Takayet about a new dream, a dream she had the night before. In this dream, she was standing at the same river of light, but this time the door was closer, and it was open, and she walked through it, and on the other side there was a garden, a green, quiet garden, full of flowers she did not recognize, but whose fragrance was so beautiful that she woke up smiling. Takayet listens to this, and she smiles too, a rare, full smile that transforms her lined face and makes her look for a moment like the young woman she once was. She tells Bakit that this is a good dream. She says that the garden is the life that is waiting for her, not a specific plan, not a detailed map, but a place of growth and beauty that she will discover by walking toward it, one step at a time. She says that the fact that the door was open means that Bakit herself has opened it, that the seeking, the questioning, the willingness to sit with uncertainty and not run from it, all of this has been the work of opening. Bakit nods. She does not fully understand, and she knows that she does not fully understand, and this is all right. Understanding will come. For now there is the planting and the black earth and the green shoots that are already beginning to emerge, and the feeling of being part of something ancient and ongoing and good. And so the season turns, as it always has, as it always will. Evening falls over Jarrett. The sky in the west is a deep glowing amber, fading upward into violet, and then into the vast dark blue of the Egyptian night, where the first stars are beginning to appear, bright and sharp and impossibly numerous, the way stars always are in a land without clouds. The air is cool for the first time in months, carrying the green smell of new growth and the faint, sweet scent of the river. Renzi sits in his boat at the landing, not going anywhere, just sitting. The boat rocks gently in the current, and the water makes its soft, lapping sound against the hull, that ancient, hypnotic rhythm that has been the same since the beginning of time. He has a piece of bread and a small jar of honey that Nefret gave him, and he eats slowly, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. He is thinking about nothing in particular, or rather, he is thinking about everything, about the river and the fish and the way the current felt today, about Nefret and her bees and the sound of her voice in the shade of the acacias, about his father and old Mahu and the marshes and the story about the capsized boat. And all of these thoughts are moving through him gently, like the water beneath him, without urgency, without weight, simply flowing. Nefret is closing up her hives for the night. She moves among them in the blue dusk, checking each entrance, listening for the low, contented hum that tells her the colonies are settled. The bees are quiet now, clustered inside their clay cylinders, sharing their warmth, guarding their honey, resting after the long day's work. Nefret places her hand flat against the side of a hive and feels the faint vibration of the colony within, that living warmth, that steady pulse that has been her companion and her comfort for so many years. She stands there for a moment, her hand on the hive, her face turned toward the last light in the west, and she is at peace. Khafra has finished his work for the day. He has cleaned his mortar and pestle, covered his steeping basins, sealed his jars. He steps out of his workshop into the evening air and breathes deeply. The smells of his trade cling to his skin and his clothes, myrrh and cinnamon and the faint, sweet ghost of blue lotus. And for a moment, standing in the cool air with the stars coming out, he feels a quiet pride in this. These scents are his. They are the evidence of his craft, his labor, his place in the world. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the work itself, the daily, careful, devoted work of turning raw materials into something beautiful, is its own form of recognition, its own proof of worth. He does not need the temple to tell him so. He carries the sacred on his hands. Beckett walks home through the darkening streets. She passes the temple, where a thin thread of incense smoke rises from the evening offering, spiraling upward into the still air. She passes the market square, empty now, the vendors' stalls folded and silent. She passes the canal, where the water catches the last light and holds it for a moment before letting it go. She is thinking about the garden in her dream, the open door, the flowers she did not recognize. She does not know where her life will take her. She does not know what she will become. But she knows now that the not knowing is not something to fear. It is the open door itself, the space through which all possibility flows. And Takayet sits in the doorway of her small room, her scroll in her lap, her eyes half closed, listening to the night. The sycamore tree in the courtyard rustles faintly in a breeze that carries the smell of the river and the newly planted fields. She is an old woman. She has seen many floods, many plantings, many seasons of growth and harvest and rest. She has interpreted 1,000 dreams, and she has learned that all of them, in the end, are saying the same thing, that life is a river, and we are all moving on it, and the only wisdom is to trust the current and to tend what is given to us to tend, and to release, when the time comes, what is given to us to release. She closes her eyes. The night deepens. The stars turn slowly in their great wheel above the valley, and the river flows on as it has always flowed, carrying its dark, rich waters northward through the land, past the temples and the tombs, past the fields and the villages, past the sleeping towns where lamps are being extinguished one by one, past the fisherman in his boat and the beekeeper among her hives and the perfume maker breathing the evening air and the young woman walking home under the stars and the old woman listening to the silence and the bees in their clay houses and the birds in their reed nests and the crocodiles on their mud flats and the hippos in their deep pools, carrying all of it, all of them, all of this abundant, ordinary, extraordinary life, onward and onward toward the sea. The river does not hurry. It does not need to. It has all the time in the world, and now so do you. Let the river carry you. Let the hum of the hives grow distant. Let the warm air settle around you like a blanket, and the stars wheel slowly overhead, and the night deepen into its softest, quietest blue. The people of Jaret are resting now. Renzi has tied his boat and climbed the bank and walked to his small house, where he will sleep with the sound of the water still in his ears. Nefret has closed her door and lain down on her mat, and the last thing she hears before sleep takes her is the faint, low hum of the hives outside, steady as a heartbeat. Khafra's workshop is dark and fragrant and still. Bakit is asleep, dreaming of gardens. Takayat is asleep, dreaming of nothing at all, resting in the deep, clear emptiness that lies beneath all dreams. The town is quiet. The river flows. The stars turn.